I never thought I'd be standing in the rain at midnight watching my boss cry on my doorstep, but that's exactly where I found myself. What happened next would change everything between us, and I wasn't ready for any of it. James Matthews adjusted his tie nervously as he walked through the gleaming glass doors of Horizon Marketing. 6 months ago, he'd been just another struggling single dad trying to make ends meet. Now he worked directly under Victoria Winters, the formidable CEO who plucked him from obscurity after seeing his freelance portfolio. The same Victoria who just last night had pressed her lips dangerously close to his before he gently pushed her away. The same Victoria who probably didn't remember any of it through her champagne haze. "Morning, James." Her voice cut through his thoughts as she breezed past, not a hint of recognition about what had transpired between them. The subtle notes of her perfume lingered in the air, making his heart race, despite his better judgment. How could she act so normal when he barely slept, replaying those moments in his mind? But Victoria Winters had built her reputation on composure. At 34, she was the youngest CEO in the company's history, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see through everyone's facades, and long blonde hair she typically wore in a sleek ponytail. Today, however, it cascaded down her shoulders, making her look softer, somehow. "The Henderson presentation needs revisions," she said, not meeting his eyes. "My office, 10 minutes. James nodded, watching her walk away. What she didn't know was that he'd already decided to resign. Working together after last night seemed impossible, especially since his 5-year-old daughter, Lily, had already lost one woman she'd grown attached to. He couldn't risk letting Victoria become another. In Victoria's office, the tension was palpable. She remained focused on her computer screen while James stood, awkwardly, portfolio in hand. "Sit down, James," she finally said, her voice uncharacteristically quiet. "We need to discuss what happened." His stomach dropped. "Victoria, I know, please let me speak first." She finally looked at him, vulnerability replacing her usual confidence. "I've never been so unprofessional in my life, and I'm deeply sorry. The company party got out of hand and I had no right to put you in that position." James hadn't expected an apology. He'd prepared for cold dismissal or pretending it never happened. Not this raw honesty that made his rehearsed resignation speech stick in his throat. "I understand if you want to transfer departments or even leave the company," she continued. "I've already spoken to HR about options that would protect your position." The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words. What Victoria didn't know was how close James had come to kissing her back, how he'd wanted to since the day they first met. But his daughter had to come first. And office romances, especially with his direct superior, were complicated at best, disastrous at worst. "I don't want to leave," he found himself saying instead. "But I think we need clear boundaries." Victoria's relief was visible, though she quickly masked it with professionalism. "Absolutely. Boundaries are essential." Neither of them realized that this conversation was just the beginning of a complicated dance that would test those very boundaries over the coming months. 3 weeks later, James found himself working late, the office empty except for the cleaning staff, and unexpectedly, Victoria. She appeared in his doorway, jacket off and sleeves rolled up, a rare sight of the polished CEO in a more relaxed state. "Still here?" she asked, leaning against the door frame. "Lily's at her grandparents' for the weekend," he explained. "Figured I'd get ahead on the Westfield campaign." Victoria nodded, hesitating before asking, "Have you eaten?" "I was about to order something." This was dangerous territory, exactly the kind of situation they'd silently agreed to avoid. Yet James heard himself accept the invitation. They sat on the floor of her office, takeout containers between them, talking about everything except work. James learned that Victoria had clawed her way up from a childhood in foster care, that she played classical piano, that her confident exterior had someone who often felt like an imposter despite her success. "What about Lily's mother?" Victoria asked carefully after James had shared stories about his daughter's latest kindergarten adventures. James tensed, then sighed. "Car accident 3 years ago. Lily was just 2. Victoria's hand briefly touched his. "I'm sorry. That must have been unimaginable." "Some days it still is," he admitted. "Lily asks about her sometimes and I never know what to say." "You tell her the truth in ways she can understand," Victoria said softly. "That's all any of us can do." Their eyes met, and for a moment, James felt something shift between them, something deeper than attraction, more complex than friendship. Then his phone buzzed with a text from his mother-in-law about Lily breaking the spell. "I should go," he said, standing abruptly. Victoria nodded, gathering the empty containers. "Of course. See you Monday, James." As he drove home, James couldn't shake the feeling that despite their best intentions, the boundaries they'd established were already beginning to blur. The Westfield campaign became their shared project, requiring late nights and weekend work sessions. They maintained professionalism in the office, but their colleagues noticed the changed dynamic. The way Victoria sought James's opinion in meetings, how they seemed to communicate without words. Caroline Davis, the sharp-tongued marketing director who'd been angling for Victoria's position for years, watched their growing closeness with calculating eyes. If there was anything inappropriate happening between the CEO and her newest hire, Caroline would be the first to use it against them both. Meanwhile, against his better judgment, James had allowed Victoria to meet Lily when she'd stopped by his house to drop off urgent contracts. The meeting had been brief but significant. Lily had immediately taken to Victoria, showing her the collection of rocks she'd gathered from the playground. "Your daughter is extraordinary," Victoria had said afterward, standing on his porch with an expression he couldn't quite read. "She likes you," James replied. "She doesn't warm up to people easily, not since her mom." Victoria had looked away then. "James, we need to be careful. I'm still your boss, I know. But the way he said it made it clear that the professional distinction was becoming increasingly meaningless to him. The company's annual charity gala arrived, exactly 6 months after the night Victoria had almost kissed him. James attended alone, watching from across the room as Victoria charmed investors in a stunning emerald dress that made his breath catch. "She's quite something, isn't she?" Caroline appeared beside him, champagne in hand. "Though I wonder if the board would agree that her interest in you is purely professional." James stiffened. "I don't know what you're implying, don't you?" Caroline smiled coldly. "Victoria's worked too hard to throw it all away on an office romance, and you with your daughter to consider. It would be a shame if things got complicated." Before James could respond, Victoria approached them, her smile faltering slightly at Caroline's presence. "James, the Hendersons were asking about you," she said smoothly. "Caroline, I believe the CFO was looking for you earlier." Caroline's smile tightened as she excused herself, leaving them alone. "What was that about?" Victoria asked quietly. "Nothing," James replied. "She's fishing for something to use against you." Victoria's expression hardened. "Let her try. I've dealt with worse than Caroline Davis." But later that evening, as they stood on the balcony away from the crowd, Victoria's confidence wavered. "Maybe she's right to be concerned," she admitted, looking out at the city lights. "I've worked my entire life to get here, fought against every stereotype about women in leadership. The last thing I need is rumors about sleeping my way to the top or abusing my position. Is that what you think this is?" James asked, hurt evident in his voice. "No," Victoria said firmly, "but perception matters in this world, James. You know that. So what are you saying?" Victoria turned to face him, her expression resolute despite the pain in her eyes. "I'm saying that whatever is happening between us needs to stop for both our sakes." The words hung between them, neither willing to acknowledge how much they hurt. 2 weeks later, everything changed again. James received a call from Lily's school. She had a high fever and needed to be picked up immediately. But he was in the middle of presenting to their biggest potential client with no way to leave. In desperation, he texted Victoria, who was in a board meeting. Within minutes, she had excused herself and was on her way to Lily's school, using the emergency contact authorization James had added after their first meeting. When James finally made it home hours later, he found Victoria sitting on his couch reading quietly to a sleeping Lily who was curled against her side. Her fever broke, Victoria whispered as he entered. The pediatrician said, "It's just a virus. She should be fine in a day or two." James stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sight before him. "You called her doctor?" Victoria nodded. "I hope that was okay. Your neighbor, Mrs. Patel, I think, gave me the number. She checked in earlier to make sure everything was all right. You didn't have to do all this," James said, sitting beside them. "I wanted to," Victoria replied simply. "She's a special little girl." As she carefully extracted herself from the sleeping child, James saw Victoria in a completely new light. Not as his boss, not as the untouchable CEO, but as a woman who had dropped everything to care for his daughter. "Victoria," he began, but she shook her head. "Don't say anything now," she whispered. "We're both emotional, and this doesn't change the complications." But as she gathered her things to leave, James couldn't let her go without saying what he'd held back for months. "What if I don't care about the complications anymore?" he asked, following her to the door. "What if some things are worth the risk?" Victoria paused, her hand on the door knob. "James, I'm not asking for promises," he continued. "I'm just asking if you feel it too. This thing between us that's more than attraction, more than friendship." The vulnerability in her eyes told him everything before she spoke. "Of course, I feel it. But feeling something doesn't make it simple. Nothing worth having ever is," he replied. She left without answering, and James wondered if he just made the biggest mistake of his life. The next morning, Caroline Davis filed a formal complaint with HR, alleging an inappropriate relationship between Victoria and James that created a hostile work environment. The evidence was circumstantial. Victoria leaving the gala early the same night as James, her abrupt departure from the board meeting, witness accounts of their intimate conversations, Victoria was temporarily removed from direct supervision of James's work while the investigation proceeded. The office buzzed with rumors and James found himself isolated, colleagues suddenly distant. "I'm so sorry," he told Victoria when they finally spoke, meeting secretly in a coffee shop far from the office. "This is exactly what you were afraid of. It's not your fault," she insisted, though the strain showed on her face. "Caroline's been waiting for any opportunity. If it wasn't this, it would have been something else." "I could resign," James offered. "Find another job." "Absolutely not," Victoria said firmly. "That would only make it look like we have something to hide." But as the investigation dragged on, the pressure mounted. James worried about the impact on Lily if he lost his job, while Victoria faced scrutiny from the board about her leadership judgment. The breaking point came when James discovered Lily in tears after school, having overheard other parents talking about her dad and his boss getting in trouble. That night, after putting Lily to bed, James made a decision. He drafted his resignation letter, effective immediately. Citing personal reasons, he would find another job even if it meant starting over. Lily had to come first. He drove to Victoria's apartment, resignation letter in hand, determined to end the situation before it caused more damage. When she opened the door, he could see she'd been crying, something he'd never witnessed before. "The board called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning," she said without preamble. "They're considering asking for my resignation." James felt the ground shift beneath him. "Because of me. Because of us. Because Caroline convinced them that my judgment is compromised." Victoria corrected, letting him in. "She's been working on this for months, gathering support. Our friendship just gave her the ammunition she needed." "I came to give you this," James said, handing her the envelope. "My resignation. It's the only way to protect your position." Victoria read it silently, then tore it in half. "No, Victoria, no," she repeated firmly. "I'm not letting you sacrifice your career, and I'm done letting fear dictate my life." She moved closer to him, determination replacing the vulnerability he'd seen earlier. "For years I've put this company above everything. My personal life, my happiness, any chance at real connection. I told myself it was the price of success. It doesn't have to be," James said softly. "I know that now." She took his hands in hers. "Tomorrow I'm going to tell the board that while there has been no impropriety between us, I am recusing myself from directly managing your work going forward. Not because we've done anything wrong, but because I want the freedom to explore what might be right." James felt hope rising for the first time in weeks. "And if they don't accept that, then I'll know this isn't a company I want to lead anymore," she said simply. Some things matter more than titles or corner offices. In that moment, with no alcohol to blame, no professional pretense between them, James did what he'd wanted to do for months. He leaned forward and kissed her gently at first. Then, with all the emotion they'd both been holding back, when they finally parted, Victoria smiled. "I thought you said if I were sober you'd make the first move." "I just did," he replied, pulling her close again. The board meeting the next morning was tense, but ultimately anticlimactic. Victoria presented her solution calmly and professionally. James would report to the creative director instead of directly to her, removing any conflict of interest. Caroline's allegations were addressed and largely dismissed based on lack of evidence. As Victoria had suspected, Caroline's campaign against her had less support than she'd claimed. The board, while concerned about appearances, valued Victoria's leadership too much to act hastily. 6 months later, James and Victoria sat on a bench at the playground watching Lily climb with newfound confidence. She asked if you were going to be her new mom. James said quietly, taking Victoria's hand. Victoria's breath caught. "What did you tell her?" "That we're still figuring things out, but that you care about her very much, and so do I." Victoria leaned against his shoulder. Good answer. They'd taken things slowly, mindful of Lily's feelings and the complicated start to their relationship. Victoria had proven herself not just a capable CEO, but a patient, caring presence in Lily's life. Never pushing, always respectful of the special bond between father and daughter. "I got offered that position at Meridian," James said after a moment. "Creative director, my own team." Victoria straightened, turning to face him. "James, that's wonderful. When do you start?" "I haven't accepted yet," he admitted. It would mean no conflicts of interest at Horizon, but it's a big change, she finished for him. "Whatever you decide, I support you. You know that?" James nodded, watching Lily wave excitedly from the top of the climbing structure. "I do know that. It's one of the many reasons I love you." The words slipped out naturally, though he hadn't planned to say them. Victoria's eyes widened slightly before her face softened into a smile. "I love you too," she replied, the words carrying the weight of everything they'd overcome to reach this point, "both of you." As Lily ran back to them, cheeks flushed with excitement, James realized that sometimes the most complicated beginnings led to the most beautiful journeys. What had started with an almost kiss at a company party had become something neither of them could have anticipated. A family forming, one careful step at a time. Daddy, can Victoria come for pancakes tomorrow? Lily asked, climbing onto his lap. James looked at Victoria, who nodded with a smile. Absolutely, sweetheart. Pancakes sound perfect. Life wasn't simple. It never would be. There would always be challenges, complications, moments of doubt. But sitting there with the two people who had unexpectedly become the center of his world, James knew with absolute certainty that some risks were worth taking, some boundaries worth crossing, and some loves worth fighting for. If you enjoyed this story about finding love in unexpected places and the courage it takes to pursue it despite the complications, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories that remind us of what truly matters in life. We'd love to know which country you're watching from. Let us know in the comments below.